I don't know. I guess if I can,
Happy,
for Lincoln and Washington, it's okay.
right, right. Yeah, I don't think we could go much further, right?
Right.
Oh, goodness gracious. Hello, Merle. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you guys?
We're doing pretty well, right, Bill?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I
Oh,
know one
good.
thing,
I
one
heard
thing
the
we're-
comment about Happy President's Day.
right? Happy,
You know, you have to-
happy former President's Day.
That works.
Well, Don, Friday night was very nice with your colleagues.
It was beautiful.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Had a lot of fun. Had a lot of fun. The most fun was Nate and Chaim and I going to. Nate's used this this recording engineer for years,
Yeah.
and he has a house, in Beverly Hills near Sunset, and he has his recording studio there.
Wow.
And he did like every television show known to humankind in the 70s and 80s, and every recording artist you could think of. So it's kind of like going back in
Wow.
time.
Where was the exterior taken? The three of you singing?
That was at this recording engineer's home.
At his home. Okay.
It's this
Okay.
big sprawling property up on Doheny near Sunset.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
sure.
very much a kind of a big property in need of lots of care. But there's like three houses on the property, the main house, and there's another guest house, and he would turn this other large guest house into his recording studio, which it's been for forever.
Great.
And so
It was
there's this
very nice to
lawn,
see
there's this
Marsha.
area outside of that, which is where we filmed it. And it's funny because in the middle of the lawn there is this big kind of, Greek statue. And we shoot it all, and it was Chaim's videographer who did a fabulous job. But we realized after looking at the first cut that, guys, we can't have that Greek statue in every, it was like ridiculous. So he brilliantly went back and got all these beautiful shots of people around their, Shabbos tables, and edited out the Greek statue, urinating into the little pond, and replaced it with appropriate Shabbat table stuff. But we had the best time. It was just so
That's
much fun.
cool.
Yeah.
It was great to see Marsha there for what she did as well.
Right. Marsha's so wonderful. I met Marsha 25 years ago when I was at Rodef Sholem in Manhattan. She came because she was a close friend of Rabbi Camille Angel.
Oh, right.
Who was at Rodef Sholem then, and I think she came in. Actually, it was the weekend of Camille's wedding. That's when I met Marsha for the first time. That's at least 25
I remember
years
her
ago.
from camp years ago when
she's-
Sharon was a
she's-
camper. That's
Yeah,
how
she's
many years
extraordinary.
ago.
And so she studied, with me and others, obviously, at the Academy for Jewish
That's
Religion.
great.
And she's been at Emmanuel for, 15, 20 years now. And she's
That's
wonderful. Her
wonderful.
brother, by
She's
the
a
way,
wonderful woman.
amazing. And her brother is a brilliant artist.
Yes.
Shimon Atty.
Yes.
Fantastic, like installational art pieces. Anyway, yeah.
Very talented family.
Oh, indeed, and just the finest people. Right. Yeah. So, yeah. There she is. Risa, how are you, honey? You good? This is our opening schmooze. We'd like to hear from everyone.
Hello. Yes, I'm very well. Everything
All
is
right.
very good.
You look
Excellent.
wonderful.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. I am back to normal.
Excellent.
God bless you.
As good as that could be. I
Well,
don't
whatever normal is in today's definition, I'm
Exactly.
beyond that.
exactly.
Right.
I can only tell you I'm comfortable and happy and doing my usual stuff.
That's normal.
That's about as good as it gets, Risa.
That's right.
That's
Period.
fabulous.
Right? And so is Stan, so everybody's fine.
Yeah, Stan's
Right.
still a little bit weak and still has a caretaker, but it's just because everybody's afraid that he can't walk. And
Yeah.
if he
All
falls
right.
with the
Well,
walker, he's in trouble. So,
Okay, yeah.
but that's okay.
We'll
So
deal
Don,
with that too.
Don,
Yeah, yes.
were you absolutely cavelling when you had Jackie and Lisa on a couple of weeks ago? I mean, you were their
Yes.
mentor. You were their.
Of course. And I'm planning on doing something with both with Jackie and Emma Mayer, my
Oh my gosh.
two cantorial girls.
Oh,
It's fun.
wonderful.
They're both in cantorial school right now. And Emma did her recital 2 weeks ago now at Hebrew Union College. So I was on for that, and then they have a discussion period afterwards. So I was in the gallery, and that was very special, very special. Yeah, I'm going to do something with Jackie and Emma and Scott Sr. and a few others. Do a whole Friday night service together. Yeah, it's
Beautiful.
more than gratifying, that's for sure.
When should Jackie be ordained?
I believe, you know what? I'm not sure if it's this year, maybe it's next year.
Okay, it's within a year.
It
She's
should be.
phenomenal.
It should be. I mean, I think she's taken some time off and lowered her course load, since she got married, and but I don't think it's this year, but I'm pretty sure it should be next
Okay,
year.
thank
And
you.
Emma has 2 more years. Yeah, 2 more years for Emma.
I thought Friday night, the Four Cantors was wonderful fun.
Oh, thank
I
you.
loved it.
Lisa.
I loved
Thank
it.
you.
Especially
a lot
the
of fun.
3 of you.
Right?
I don't know how you did that outside and inside.
Well, here's the story. It's COVID, right?
Yes.
So when we filmed, we each recorded in the studio separately, can't
Right.
be in there at the same time. But the videographer was in there,
Right.
filming us in there individually. And then we all 3 of us went outside, and we could be outside spaced.
Right.
At that point, we'd already made the recording. So at that point, we're lip syncing.
Oh, that's what I thought.
So we have a little speaker out there. It's feeding us the playback, and we're just lip syncing.
You're lip syncing. That's
Yeah.
that's what I thought.
That's
That's
how
incredible.
it's done now. When you can't, it would be great.
But it
if
was
we were all in the
terrific.
studio.
It
Right?
was terrific.
We had, I cannot tell you how much
The whole
fun we had.
evening. The whole evening was fun. The
Right.
whole evening was fun.
I'm glad.
Those
I'm
cantors are just
Yeah.
wonderful.
Are you going to do it again?
Absolutely. We've already looked at the calendar. We're choosing our dates.
Oh, great.
And I spoke to my younger colleague, who's the senior cantor now at Central Synagogue in New York, Dan Mutlu, who's a wonderful
He's
talent.
fabulous.
Right?
He's
We're
fabulous.
we're planning something, maybe just the 2 of us. I might add a 3rd cantor. We'll do our own version of the 3 tenors.
Ah,
And either the end of May or the middle of June, we're going to get that. He's on double duty now because Rabbi Angel is on sabbatical. So he just got really busy. But yeah, we're gonna do a lot of that stuff, which is
How are you going to keep this energy and
I
these
don't know,
fabulous-
Nan, but if you have some special kind of, medication that's organic, I'll be happy to take it.
Oh my gosh. Can I ask you an academic question?
Of course.
On occasion when I've given tours,
Yeah.
and especially Israelis, they go nuts that we have an organ or music in our, and
Of course.
music goes way back. I don't have to tell you. You
Of
taught
course.
you
Yeah.
taught me.
Yeah.
So, what is that all about?
It's about one thing, and that is that the rabbis of the Talmud, it's a deeper story, but I'll make it as succinct as I can. But this is a 2,000-year-old story that has impacted Judaism really for the last 2,000 years. And that is that if you go back to second destruction of the temple. So right before 70 Common Era. For a few centuries, you had warring factions, political factions, right? The temple cult and the priests, who were the Sadducees, and the Pharisees, who were the grassroots organization of what would become rabbis. And they were at war with one another. And finally, when the temple is destroyed, the priestly cult loses its power. The Pharisees take over, right? And what's one of the things they do? They want to obliterate and destroy even the traditions, the 1,000-year-old traditions of the ancient temple. They want to wipe it away. So they outlaw the use of any musical instruments on Shabbat, so that there'd be no reappearance, no reconstruction of the ancient temple and all of its rituals. Because the main ritual within the temple, and obviously in addition to sacrificial cult, was its music, the temple orchestra and the temple choir. So it was a political motivated move. And that's where the abolishment, the prohibition against using musical instruments on Shabbat. And over time, in the Talmud, they make all kinds of reasons. Well, you can't carry anything on Shabbat because music itself is beautiful, but what if, the violinist strings break? They just made stuff up to guarantee, that none of these rituals would be reconstructed, right? But so to this day, in the Orthodox world, which controls all Jewish ritual in Israel, right? No instruments on Shabbat, right? If you go to any Orthodox synagogue and very traditional conservative synagogues, there's no instruments on Shabbat morning. To this day. Some more liberal conservative synagogues, like Valley Beth Shalom, Sinai Temple, they have instruments, on Friday night and Shabbat morning as well. But in the Orthodox world, certainly no use of musical instruments. Sad, but true. Right? So that's the reason for this. So anyone who's grown up in Israel, you can't have music in synagogue because they never have, right? It's Orthodox. There are a few liberal synagogues there now, and have been for a while now, that handful that use instruments, right?
Even though our liturgy makes reference to song and
all the time, you have to sing everything. Psalm 150, it lists all the instruments, right? But this was, again, I think it was a political debate, and it is President's Day, so I'll only make one politically connected statement. In a way, it's no different than creating legislation that bars certain groups of people from voting. We're going to make rules now, laws that will legally prohibit the reinstitution of music in the synagogue. Because you can't stop people, right? And you've been doing it for 1,500 years. Now we're going to outlaw it. And that's what they did.
thanks.
Yes, Miriam.
Yes. Thank you for what you're saying. It is a fact then that at one time in the Orthodox synagogues, or even very, very I've heard this, I could be wrong, very, very early temple gatherings or temple tefillot, that there was music. Is that correct or incorrect?
I would tell you that as we were discussing, from the time of the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, once the rabbis, okay, have secured authority over all religious and therefore legal matters, the use of any instruments on Shabbat is prohibited. That doesn't mean not singing. You have the cantor, you have big choirs, okay, but no organ, no piano, no nothing.
And the reason for that?
Which I just explained was their main objective was to obliterate even the memory of the millennial old musical traditions of the ancient temple. That's the truth, and that's the reason.
Do we have a tradition of the temple music anyways? Was it preserved somehow?
That's a great question. It is not. There have been some who claim to know what the music was. There's no possible way that anybody really knows. We can deduce a few things, which my late great ethnomusicologist, Professor Dr. Eric Werner, addressed. We know pretty much what instruments were used in the ancient temple. We know that there was a substantial choir and a substantial group of musicians. But we know that most of the instruments were probably plucked string instruments and perhaps cymbals they used, because passages, including Psalms that would end with the word Amen, Selah. Selah is a word that's not Hebrew, but it's a word whose origins are onomatopoetica. The scholars believe that Selah was a word designed to describe the sound of the cymbal. Selah. Cymbal roll and a little crash at the end to mark the end of a song, right? So we know that there were cymbals, perhaps some primitive wind instruments like flute, recorder, perhaps primitive harps. We see pictures of those, ancient drawings, perhaps even a toph, primitive drums. So if we consider all those instruments, they're not loud instruments. So the overall sound of that orchestra would have been generally on the soft side. That much we can infer. And what the actual music sounded like melodically, impossible to know. We never will, right? You can bet it did not sound like Zolzer or Lewandowski, right? And it didn't sound Western either. Okay? So that's pretty much all we know. In Europe, however, in different periods in different cities in Europe, the desire to bring back instrumental music into the synagogue would from time to time, raise its head, so to speak. We had it in the late Renaissance in Modena in Italy with Salomone Rossi, right? And the great Rabbi Leon of Modena wrote a treatise in defense of the use of instrumental music. And his music sounded like, Salomone Rossi sounded like Monteverdi, right? But that only really lasted a relatively short time, right? And then in the early Reform in Germany, in Berlin, in other Western cities, in Paris, that's when the Reform movement, the liberal movement, really took hold and became a powerful movement, right? And they then modeled their synagogues after the churches with big organs, right? And going forward, all the liberal congregations, and they brought that tradition to America as well. You look at all the early Reformed temples in America to this day have pipe organs, like Wilshire Boulevard Temple, like Central Synagogue, and Rodov Sholem and Temple Emmanuel in New York City. All those synagogues have big pipe organs, and throughout the country, in every major city where you had a large Reformed temple, they were all equipped with pipe organs. Not so obviously the Orthodox movement, or until the 70s, the largest movement of Judaism in America, the conservative movement. There was a wide variety. Some, the one I grew up in Cleveland, which was well over 2,000 families then, we had a pipe organ, but we only used it on Friday night. Professional choir, instruments on Friday night, no organ, no choir on Shabbat morning. Right? And there were a lot of traditional synagogues who did that, right? Because Friday night was showtime, 8 p.m., right? Shabbat morning was for the daveners. They don't want to hear any instruments. So
What about-
that's, yeah.
What about high holidays?
That's a great question, Nan, because at least if the Temple of my Youth is a model for those more liberal conservative synagogues, high holidays was the other time of year, full choir and organ. Yep. And you have, two of the bigger conservative synagogues here, Sinai and Valley Beth Shalom, have followed that model for many, many, many years. Right? Yeah. So now, this is great. I don't even have to plan anything. We just get on and we just start, talking and asking questions, right? So what I want to start today, I'm going to follow up with, again, next week, and then probably right before Passover, is to delve into the beautiful tradition of the 5 Megillot, Chamesh Megillot, the 5 scrolls. So if you think to yourself now, how many scrolls are used that we chant from throughout the course of the year? Obviously, the Torah scroll, right? And can you name any others? Miriam?
Esther, Megillat Esther.
Megillat
Ruth.
Esther, which is coming
Ruth.
up in less than 2 weeks, right?
And Ruth on Shavuot.
Ah, that's right.
And then Lamentations, Echa.
Echa, correct?
And I
Tisha
think
B'Av.
Shir HaShirim too.
Absolutely. The Song of
Yeah.
Songs, which is traditionally chanted on Passover as it relates to the spring festival.
So that
And
would make 5.
Isn't the Book of Job on the high holidays?
No,
that's a great
That's Torah.
great guess, actually, but you're close in terms of its sensibility. Tisha B'Av,
Tisha B'Av.
Echa you mentioned, right?
And
And
That's
Shir
Lamentations.
HaShirim, Ruth, and
Shir
Esther.
HaShirim, Ruth, and Esther. And one more. There are 6.
I thought there were 5.
Well, there are
I thought
He
there were
5
counted Torah.
There are 5 different scrolls, okay, not
Plus
including Torah. They're
Right.
called the Chamesh Megillot. And why? There's one more because the trope tradition, the melodic tradition of Shir HaShirim is also applied to Ruth. It's chanted in the same trope. But there's one more which we chant on Shmini Atzeret. Think of its Latin or Greek origin name, Ecclesiastes,
Oh,
Ecclesiastes.
right.
Oh,
which in Hebrew is Kohelet.
right.
Okay, Kohelet,
So-
yes.
In the Ashkenazic world, each of those, and why is because there were originally 5 scrolls. You actually read those texts from scrolls. But today, and for quite a while now, there's only one of them that is still read in the temple from a scroll, and that's Esther.
Esther.
So we only read from 2 scrolls, certainly in the non-Orthodox world, right?
I
Torah
seem
scroll.
to recall that HUC in LA has a Haftorah scroll. Is that
Yes. Sure.
is that
Look,
totally
all
unusual?
of our biblical texts were originally in scrolls. When is the invention of the printing press?
True.
Hundreds.
For 1,500 years, all of our texts, certainly all the
Scrolls.
biblical texts, were in scrolls, right? And Next Monday, I'm going to have our Megillat Esther scroll here for you to see. I'll be able to show it to you, and we can experience that. So we only chant in the modern world from two different scrolls, the Torah scroll and Megillat Esther. Over time, those 5 biblical texts became attached to certain holidays, and that's when we read them for a variety of reasons. Esther, very clear. It contains the story, not the, it's not a documentary, okay? It's a made-up story. We'll get into that a little more deeply in a few minutes. They're attached to holidays. Esther for Purim, and chronologically after Purim, it's Passover. And we chant from Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, because of its many poetic references to springtime and blossoms and the flowers and the beauty of spring. Right? Following that, in order, would be the Book of Ruth, which is attached to Shavuot, and it's kind of an allegorical connection, right? And that is this devotion to God, Ruth and Naomi, right? 10 Commandments, the devotion to Torah. Then in the summer months, perfect.
Is that also because it's a model of conversion? Is it part of it because?
I don't think that it is, for sure. It is that, but I don't think it's why they necessarily chose that to be read on Shavuot, which celebrates the giving of the Torah, right? But I think it has more to do with Naomi's devotion and love for Ruth and her people, the people of Israel. Right? And then Lamentations on Tisha B'Av.
Book of Jeremiah.
Right. And then for Shmini Atzeret is the Book of Kohelet. The connection of the text is not necessarily clear how it's, attached to Shmini Atzeret, but one of these scrolls had to be attached to Shmini Atzeret because Shmini Atzeret is one of the truly main festivals of the year traditionally. And the Book of Kohelet actually reflects a Hellenistic philosophy. It really is a kind of a fatalistic philosophy, Hellenistic in its outlook, not necessarily Jewish in particular, but because it's Shmini Atzeret, it would have been the only major holiday that didn't have a scroll attached to it. Right? So just to say in terms of the melody, Shir HaShirim, that melody for Shir HaShirim, which I'm going to demonstrate in a little bit, it's also applied to the Book of Ruth and to the Book of Kohelet. So when you hear each of those Megillot chanted, they all sound the same. They're all chanted in Shir HaShirim trope or melody. Esther has its own, as does Lamentations. Okay. So let's first that's the overview, okay? And Don, if you'll put up our first little text of the Book of Esther, you'll see the Hebrew just for a few opening verses from the Book of Esther, right? And I also want to thank Jessica for getting all of these texts ready for us to experience. So it really should say the Scroll of Esther, right? Obviously, all of our biblical texts are now printed in books, but it is the Scroll of Esther. And again, the first thing you notice when you look at the text is that it has trope signs, right? Those trope markings. If you look at the first 3 words, Vayehi bimei Achashverosh. Under Vayehi is that little hook going from left to right. Under bimei is that little, at the end of the word, that little backwards L. And under Achashverosh at the end is a little upside down wishbone. These are all trope signs. The trope signs, by the way, the actual physical trope signs are the same for everything that we chant, whether it's Torah, Haftarah, the scrolls. The system of trope symbols remains the same for all of them. What changes is the melody to which those trope signs are sung, right? So just as an example, if you look at those first three words, the first trope sign under Vayehi is called a tipcha. The one under Bimei is called a munach. And the one under Achashverosh is an et nach ta. And I think we touched upon this a little while ago, that all these trope sign names are Aramaic, they're not Hebrew, which gives us a pretty good clue as to when the system of trope was developed. It means it was during the centuries when Aramaic was the prominent and the spoken language within ancient Israel. So we have a tipcha, a munach, and an et nach ta. And all the trope signs work in patterns. So what I'm going to attempt to do now is I'm going to sing those three trope signs in 6 different trope systems, okay? Right? If it were Torah, it would be Tibcha munach et ta, right? If it were Haftarah, Tibcha munach et ta, right? If it were Shir Hashirim, Tibcha munach et ta. If it were Lamentations, Tibcha munach et ta. Okay. If it were if it were High Holiday Torah, it would start with Amen, Amen, Vayehi bimei Achashverosh. So there's 6 different trope systems when you think about it. Actually, Torah on the high holidays. There are 2 different ones. And then Shir HaShirim, right? Book of Esther and Lamentations. Right? So let's first hear a little Book of Esther, right? It sounds like this. Vayehi bimei Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh, hamalech mehodu v'yarkush, sheva v'yesrim meya medina. It's rapid. It's kind of in a proclamation kind of style. There's no caressing of the words. You get to it, okay? Second line. Bayamim hahem keshevet hamelech Achashverosh al kisei malchuto asher b'Shushan bira בשנת 3 שנות עשה משתה לכל שריו ועבדיו חיל פרס ומדי הפרטמים ושרי המדינות לפניו. On and on and on it goes this way. One fascinating feature about the Scroll of Esther in terms of its chanting, and I'm going to get into this much more thoroughly next week, is that throughout the scroll, in different chapters and different phrases, you depart. There's a departure from the normal chant of Esther, and other little melodies are inserted, right? I'll give you an example. There's a section, let me see if I can find it right now, when Mordecai is in deep, dark depression. Right? Let me see if I can find that little passage now. Where he understands the ominous future for the Jewish people, right? He knows about Haman and he learns about his plot to exterminate. And he mourns like it is Tisha B'Av, right? And suddenly, out of that chant, you're exactly right, right? The phrase before it is in Esther chant. Of course, we all know the tradition when the name of Haman is shouted out, right? That's when we spin our groggers to drown out even the sound of his name and his memory for all time. Right?
Boo.
That's exactly right. Right. So the phrase before, which it sounds like this: Haratzim yatzeu dechufim bidvar hamelech vehadat nitena b'shushan abira vehamelech vehaman. When you hear the Haman, we yell, we scream, we spin our grabbers. Then
I'll go boo.
Yashvu lishto v'hayir Shushan avocha. Then suddenly, here's Mordechai tearing his clothes, sackcloth and ashes, right? Umordechai yada et kol asher nasa, vayikra Mordechai et begadav, vayilbash sak va'efer, vayetze betoch ha'ir, vayizak, zaka gedola umara. Then back into Esther. There are several other spots where certain other melodies are inserted into the text. There's in one phrase they're talking about the king, and suddenly we hear this melody from the high holidays, from the Malchuyot section of Rosh Hashanah that talks about God as king, and this other melody is inserted, right? So Esther, I would suggest, among all the Megillot, is the most difficult one to master, to chant, right? It's 10 chapters, goes on for a long time, and it's difficult Hebrew, but its chanting tradition is also complex, right? So that is the Scroll of Esther, right? When was it written? Some scholars believe that it was written sometime around the 4th or 5th centuries BCE. In all likelihood, more recent scholarship says probably sometime in the 1st or 2nd centuries of the Common Era, right? And during the time of Xerxes the First. There are lots of literary proof for its being thought to be a much later text in the 4th or 5th centuries. And its tradition is old, ancient, both Sephardic and Ashkenazic traditions. Of course, the Sephardic musical traditions are very, very different. So that's the Book of Esther. Our next scroll, chronologically, was Shir HaShirim, first associated with Pesach.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Do the Sephardic also read the Scroll of Esther differently when they do their tropes and their
Yes,
Megillah reading?
absolutely. All of their musical traditions are different from the Ashkenazi, melodically, absolutely, yeah, very different. And by the way, there are lots of differences between how one Sephardic community may chant it versus another. They're not universal. Right? Depends on Sephardic from where, Morocco, Spain, Middle East, right? And other Jewish communities within the Middle East, they're not necessarily Sephardic, right? They're Middle Eastern. Right? So
they're all different, and they all have different melodies then for this?
They do.
Everything.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Because if you think about it, none of these things were ever written down, right? Until like 1,000 years later. So you learn it orally, and each community in each country would, their traditions would develop, differently over time. And, they would change the very sound of that musical language. So that's the Book of Esther. Now we're into Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. And again, we say that the melody, the melodic content of Shir HaShirim is also applied to the Book of Ruth and to Kohelet Ecclesiastes. And it is a beautiful, kind of lyrical, gentle kind of melodic sound. It's hard to describe music, in words, right? And the trope patterns melodically are pretty simple, Sounds like this. The first phrase, Shir HaShirim Asher Shlomo Yishakeri Min Shikot Pihu Ki Tovim Dodecha Miyayin L'Reach Shemanecha Tovim Shemen Turak Shemecha Al Kein Alamot Ahevucha. Lyrical, pretty, right? Gentle. Any of those words would, I think, would be appropriate. And it's appropriate to the text. So let's tell the truth. Song of Songs is a collection of erotic poetry, beginning and end. Erotic poetry. Also dates sometime around the 2nd to the 4th centuries BCE. And it was a very controversial text. It's the last of all of the texts to be admitted, so to speak, into the biblical canon. Great debate. Those more of the sages opposed its being included in the biblical canon, but the most prominent and the most authoritative Rabbi Akiba himself, was a huge fan and proponent of Shir HaShirim. And sometime during his lifetime, 1st century,
unknown caller,
he kind of gave it the push it needed to be included in the biblical canon. And Shir HaShirim is the last text to be included in the biblical canon. The biblical canon ends with Shir HaShirim.
Hello?
Yes.
Don?
Merle.
Hello?
Yes, Merle.
Okay, so we're all familiar with the writing of Torah scrolls, commissioning Torah scrolls for congregations. Does anybody ever commission currently, or within the last however many years,
Right.
commission these scrolls to be written for congregations or schools or anything?
That is such a great question, Merle.
Don't ask me where it came from. It just all
It
of a
came from
sudden-
your inquisitive mind. That's where it came from. So I would say I cannot speak for the entire Orthodox world. I really can't. My
right.
guess is they probably do.
Okay.
In places where they still read all of the Megillot from scrolls, I would imagine they do. First, I can answer in the positive, definitely Scrolls of Esther. Okay. We
Okay.
commissioned one to be written about 10 years ago, which is the one I'll show you next Monday.
That's right. I forgot.
Right.
Okay.
Because we still read the Scroll of Esther
Right.
publicly. The other ones, I've never been in any synagogue where they read any of the other Megillot from scrolls. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. I would be pretty certain
I mean,
that
it
they do.
wasn't even until I don't know how many years ago where I never even saw it in a book. I mean, until all of a sudden I started collecting
Yeah,
Jewish books. But
sure. Well, it's been in book form, for as long as any other biblical text is.
right.
Right. But the tradition of chanting them in synagogues from scrolls, at least in the non-Orthodox world, has been the predominant mode. I don't think I've ever seen. I know I've never seen a scroll of Song of Songs or Ecclesiastes. I've never seen any of those. Right?
Thank you.
Although I'm pretty certain they exist. So that's a great question. Yeah.
Thanks.
So since there's no more practical reason in the larger Jewish world to commission them, since they're not chanted from scrolls anymore, that would be the reason behind it. All right. But again, this is erotic poetry. It's about the romantic and physical love between a man and a woman. And so the sages had a hard time, but it was Rabbi Akiba, because his interpretation of these erotic poems really were an allegory. For him, he considered the Song of Songs, he said, all the books of the Torah, all the books of the Bible are holy, But Shir HaShirim is the holiest of all the holy. And his allegorical interpretation was, this is the love of God between God and the people of Israel. So he was a very creative thinker, because when you read this poetry, you might have a difficult time accepting that as even as allegory, right? But that's how it got admitted into the biblical canon, right? And I will also tell you that of all the texts in the Hebrew Bible, probably with the exception of Psalms, these texts provided the most inspiration for composers, for musicians. And to this day, there's new songs being set to texts from Shir HaShirim all over the world, all the time. And for good reason. Shir HaShirim texts are sung at Jewish weddings, right? That's a prominent choice of songs to be sung at weddings. These are love songs. And there is a tradition as well among Sephardim and Ashkenazim that, and the Hasidim, that before Friday night, before Erev Shabbat begins, we chant from the Song of Songs. And again, it's from that mindset of, this is love between God and the people of Israel. And what is God's gift of love to the Jewish people but the Shabbat itself, the Torah and Shabbat. So we prepare ourselves for Shabbat by chanting from Song of Songs, right? So it's beautiful. And what holiday is it attached to? Pesach, right? So in some communities, it's the Shabbat during the festival of Pesach that it is chanted. Others may choose another day, right, to chant it. And it would be chanted in addition to the Torah and to the Haftarah for that particular service. Beautiful. So that's Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. Our third one that we'll look at briefly again is the Book of Ruth. The Book of Ruth. Also a little bit even later text, perhaps early 1st century BC, maybe even 1st century of the Common Era. And I think you have it there, Don. We can bring that up from the Book of Ruth. It too, as I mentioned, is chanted to the melodic sound of Shir HaShirim, right? And I don't think I have the text here, but the sound is the same, right? Vayehi b'mei shefot hashoftim, vayira ba'aretz, vayelech ish mi belachem Yehuda lagur b'snei Moab, uv'ishto shnei banav. Beautiful, beautiful sound. I think also fitting for the Book of Ruth. Next Monday, I'll also include one of its more famous passages, right? Wherever you go, I shall go. Al tifki ivi le'ozveich. Also, often sung at weddings, that particular text. And as we mentioned, this text is connected to the festival of Shavuot. Right? In some cases, the connection is very easily understood. In other places, I think it's really just about all of the three festivals had to have one of these texts associated with them, attached to them. Right? For Pesach and springtime makes sense. Purim, of course. The others are a little bit less clear as to why. Okay. So we have Purim, Pesach, Shavuot. And during the summer, we have can't call it really a festival, but the observance of Tisha B'Av, right? The 9th of Av, on which we chant from the Book of Lamentations, in Hebrew, Echa. So let's take a look. It's interesting to note that all of these Megillot are written within about a 200-year span. Okay. So let's take a look at Book of Lamentations. Now, Lamentations is one of those that has its own trope, right? Own melody. It is kind of a monotonal, almost monotonous kind of chant. It is kind of mournful and sounds kind of like you're droning on, right? Echa yashva badar ha'ir rabat yam hayta ke'almana rabati vadoyim sarati bamdinot hayta lamas. On and on it goes. It's a very simplified kind of trope system. It goes in phrases for the pause at Nachtah. Its pause is the same melody as the end of the sentence, which gives it its kind of repetitive, almost kind of mundane, even drone-like quality, right? It's chanted generally in a low, soft voice, right? And that's how it works. We sit on pillows. We sit on the ground with candles lit, and it's a scene of mourning. And the text is, it is painful and sad. So that's the sound of Echa, Lamentations.
Chazan,
Yes.
I just want to share with all of you something. This recalls a beautiful memory to me, because many years ago, I did have the pleasure of knowing Leonard Bernstein from Tangletown, and I was at Harvard at that time, and he was in Massachusetts, so we saw each other. And this melody of Echa, in his own melody, is incorporated in his Jeremiah Symphony.
That's exactly
So I don't know
correct.
how you can hear it. Perhaps if you go online and you ask to hear the Jeremiah Symphony, you will be able to hear it. And I think her name was Marnie Nixon. She was his singer for him, Marnie.
Yeah.
And she sings the Echa. It is so beautiful, as Leonard Bernstein decided to write his own Echa for the Jeremiah Symphony. So I just wanted to share that with you.
That's a wonderful comment, Miriam. And the truth is, in his Jeremiah Symphony, he does, it's actually, I believe, for a mezzo-soprano solo, if I'm not mistaken, but he does base some of it on the actual traditional Ashkenazic trope for Echa and expands upon that. Just as an aside, Marnie Nixon was also the voice of the singing in the movie My Fair Lady. Audrey Hepburn could not sing. That's Marnie Nixon's voice who does all the singing in the film. Merle.
Is Tisha B'Av where we're not supposed to have wedding ceremonies?
That's exactly right.
And isn't it also a mourning holiday? I mean, a
It is-
fasting holiday?
It is a fast day and a day of mourning. Absolutely. No work, fast. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So when we, over the summer, just before Tisha B'Av, we'll have a Music Matters class just on Echa. You'll hear some beautiful songs. That's right. That's right, man. Yeah, Marnie was the voice for her too. And we'll hear an excerpt, Miriam, from Bernstein's Jeremiah Symphony. We'll play that section where it's the mezzo soprano solo singing that text, right? It's powerful. And now the last one we look at, which is Kohelet, which we chant on Shmini Atzeret, right? Which really is its own festival. If you look at it and study it in its biblical context, you have the excuse me, festival of Sukkot, but then there's Shmini Atzeret. They're actually two separate holidays, and Shmini Atzeret is the most serious holiday of the year, next to Yom Kippur. And some believe that Shmini Atzeret was, in fact, the original Yom Kippur, the wearing of white, Yizkor. And on Shmini Atzeret, we chant from the Book of Ecclesiastes. It's an interesting combination in that, as I mentioned earlier, this is composed by or perhaps more than one Hellenistic Jews who've been living under, Hellenistic philosophy. And of course, he ascribes himself to be, the son of King David. He had to give himself yichus, right, so that people would actually read his text. It has the authority of, he's the son of King David. And it too is chanted according to the melodies of Shir HaShirim. But all of it, if you look at these, this opening here, in terms of the third line, what real value is there for a man in all the gains he makes beneath the sun? One generation goes, another comes, dor holech v'dor ba, but the earth remains the same forever. Ha'aretz la'olam omadet. And this is the philosophy of the entire book of Ecclesiastes, right? Everything under heaven, right? Lakol zaman. Every time, there is a time for every season, for every joy, for sadness, for death, for life, for birth. And it's, what do we learn from that, says Kohelet? Live and enjoy your life, right? Not necessarily a traditionally Jewish outlook, in fact, and it wasn't, right? But here we do have it. And of course, the rabbis, the sages drew these inferences from the Sukkah itself. It's fragile, it depends upon the climate and everything to survive. It's not permanent, much like our lives are. And Kohelet picks up on that very notion. So again, it's the same melodic content. Divrei Kohelet ben David, melech Birushalayim, Havel avalim amar Kohelet, Havel avalim akol havel. That's the sound. Shir HaShirim. Miriam, yes.
And yet, what Kohelet wrote thousands of years ago, what King Solomon wrote in Kohelet, is so applicable for eternity. Today, what shall we say?
Yeah.
He said there's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing.
Yes.
A time to hate and a time to love. A time to weep and a time to laugh. So all these things that he said are applicable to every generation for eternity to come. Especially-
they're eternal observations of,
Yes,
of
they are of
human
human
existence.
nature.
There's
Exactly.
also in there a time to kill.
That's right. That's right. He doesn't say murder, but he says there's a time to kill,
That's
a
right.
time to love. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Time to live and a time
And,
to
and
die.
a time to refrain from killing.
That's right. Yeah. So
When we're through, I'm gonna open the Book of Kohelet again because you so inspired me. And I'm gonna read Ecclesiastes, and as you
Good for
mentioned,
you.
of course,
Good for
we
you.
read it on the holiday of Sukkot. At the end of the holiday, as you
Particularly, yes,
said.
on Shmini Atzeret. And by the
Yes.
way, I think the next book you have to read in the next 10 days is reread the story of Esther, since
Yes.
Purim is coming up, right? And one thing that some of these scrolls share as well, in particular, Esther and Lamentations, these are very dark texts. Esther is, in fact, in my opinion, the darkest biblical text that we have. Because if you read through all of the book of Esther, right, it ends, sometimes we don't get to the very end, right? There's great rejoicing. Haman and his 10 sons are hung. All is well, except at the very end. When we'll look at it closely next Monday. Well, all is not well. All is not well. Because another king, another authoritarian maniac who wants to kill the Jews will rise. So the true ending of Esther is horrifying. That's why on Purim we drink so that we cannot tell the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed be Haman. Right? But looking back on all of this from the perspective of Music Matters, this is such a beautiful liturgical musical tradition. The chanting of these scrolls as they are attached to specific holidays, right? And we have 3 different, trope collections of trope melodies for these 5 scrolls, right? Esther and Echa and Shir HaShirim. And those you really only hear in the Ashkenazic world. In the Sephardic world, the chanting is not so clearly delineated. Each one of these has their very own special, trope melodies. So it adds just a beautiful dimension to our musical traditions. So that's our overview of the 5 scrolls, the Chamesh Megillot, right? And next Monday, we're going to get to hear much more of Megillat Esther. And we'll be able to put up on the screen for you and highlight all those passages I mentioned to you that are suddenly chanted in some other melody. And when we do that, we'll identify where those melodies are from and why they're applied to those texts. Right? And in closing, it's interesting to note that of all of the 5 Megillot, only the Book of Esther, traditionally, do we sing blessings before we chant it. And one reason I'm just considering is that it's the only of these texts that we still read from a scroll. The other ones are read from books, and we do not chant blessings before them, but only for the Book of Esther, right? Right. They're the same blessings, by the way, or similar to the blessings we say for Hanukkah. Also, authentically, one of our darkest holidays, believe it or not. Right? First, the blessing of Vitzivano al Mikra Megillah, right? Then it's She'asa nisim la'avotenu bayamim ha'hem hazman hazeh, for the miracles you performed for us in days of old. We chant that before Esther. And then Shehachayanu. And it has its special sound, which you'll hear next Monday. So next Monday, Esther. We'll hear more of it, and we'll get into some of the text itself. And by the way, there are lots of musical compositions inspired. There is an opera, at least one that I know of, Queen Esther, and all kinds of other wonderful songs and music, based on the story of Queen Esther. Okay, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A good President's Day.
Excellent.
All right, as we go, please stay well. I'm going
too.
Wednesday for my second vaccine. I want you to all know.
Oh, good.
Vaccine
We've
number
had
2
ours.
at Dodger Stadium. Back to Dodger Stadium. I hope doesn't take me as long as the first one, which was 6.5 hours.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what? I realize now, we went there the first day that they opened it to 65 and older.
oh.
That's why I was there for 6.5 hours. I didn't realize it at the time. Hopefully on Wednesday it won't be as bad. But
They're
I'll
just,
be happy.